There are stories that do not live entirely through their characters, but through a feeling that is almost impossible to put into words. The Last Unicorn belongs to that rare kind of story. From its opening moments, it feels as though we are stepping into a place that exists somewhere beyond ordinary time. The forests seem older than any kingdom. The wind appears to carry fragments of forgotten memories, and even silence seems to possess a language of its own. At first glance, the film tells a simple story. A unicorn discovers that she may be the last of her kind. But beneath this seemingly straightforward premise lies something much more familiar to us all: change. Few fantasy stories explore so gently the question of what happens to innocence when it finally comes into contact with the world. At the beginning, the unicorn lives in a forest that appears almost untouched by time. Spring seems eternal there. Nature is harmonious and complete. Predator and prey exist within the same quiet balance, and nothing suggests the harshness of the world beyond the trees. The forest carries a meaning that reaches far beyond its role as a setting. It can be understood as an image of an original state of existence, a place where purity, harmony, and timelessness have not yet been disturbed. It is a world in which the unicorn has never had reason to question what she is. Then, quite by chance, she overhears two hunters speaking. One of them suggests that she may be the last unicorn in the world. It is only a brief moment, and yet everything changes. There is no immediate danger. No one attacks her. No one forces her from her home. Instead, a single thought enters her mind. Perhaps I am alone. That thought possesses a strange kind of power. It is stronger than any weapon because it changes the way the world itself is perceived. The film introduces an unusual understanding of fear from the very beginning. Its greatest dangers do not necessarily come from violence. Sometimes they begin with knowledge. Once we know that something can be lost, we can no longer experience it in quite the same way. Soon afterward, the unicorn encounters a butterfly whose scattered words, songs, and fragments of memory contain a clue to the Red Bull. Hidden among all those seemingly disconnected thoughts is a terrible possibility. The other unicorns are gone. From that moment onward, the story becomes a search. But unlike so many traditional adventures, the last unicorn is not concerned with glory or conquest. No one sets out to claim a kingdom. No treasure needs to be gathered. There is no great desire for power. The purpose of the journey is simply to find something that has been lost. And because of that, the journey carries an unusual melancholy. Where many fantasy stories present hope as something created through growth and achievement, this film presents hope as the quiet courage to continue despite loss. Its characters are not merely fighting for a better future. In a deeper sense, they are fighting against forgetting. That feeling settles over almost every part of the story. The world itself contributes to it. Its landscapes are soft in color, often slightly muted, as though they have already begun to fade into memory. Castles appear old and almost abandoned. Even places touched by sunlight can seem to carry the shadow of something that existed long ago. This atmosphere reflects one of the film's central ideas. Beauty is temporary, and precisely because it is temporary, it has value. The film was released in 1982 as an international production involving the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, and Germany. Much of its animation was created by the Japanese studio Topcraft, whose artists would later form an important part of the team behind Studio Ghibli. This connection helps explain the unusually poetic visual character of the film, especially when compared with many Western animated productions of the same period. The music by Jimmy Webb, together with the songs performed by the band America, deepens this atmosphere. The songs do not simply interrupt the story in the way musical numbers sometimes do. Instead, they seem to exist alongside the narrative, strengthening its sense of distance and remembrance. The music often communicates less about what is happening than about how it feels. It moves through the film almost like a memory that never quite disappears. Another part of the film's lasting quality comes from its screenplay, written by Peter S. Beagle, who adapted his own novel. Because the author himself shaped the transition from book to screen, many of the philosophical ideas at the heart of the original story remain present. The characters speak in the language of a fairy tale, but the questions beneath their words are deeply human. What does it mean to be the last? Can innocence survive after it has learned what suffering is? Is love a gift, or does every love also contain the possibility of an irreversible loss? The film never offers simple answers. Instead, it leaves enough silence for the viewer to find their own. Perhaps that is one reason why The Last Unicorn can remain meaningful long after childhood has passed. A child may first see a magical journey through an enchanted world. An adult may recognize something quieter beneath it: impermanence, regret, loneliness, and the gradual end of innocence. The same story can therefore seem to change without actually changing at all. Its audience changes, and with every stage of life, the same scenes can take on a different meaning. Characters such as Molly Grue or King Haggard may reveal depths that were difficult to recognize when the story was first encountered. The fairy tale seems, in a sense, to grow alongside the person who remembers it. Perhaps that is the quiet secret at the heart of the film. It does not need to become different. We become different, and so the story becomes different with us. The Last Unicorn does not truly begin as a story about magic. Beneath the enchanted forests and ancient creatures, it begins as a gentle reflection on how easily certainty can disappear. Sometimes all it takes is a single question, and once that question has been asked, an entire world can begin to move. When the unicorn leaves the safety of her forest, she does more than travel from one landscape to another. She crosses a boundary between two different kinds of reality. Behind her lies a world where magic is simply part of existence. Ahead lies a world that still carries traces of the miraculous, but has almost forgotten how to recognize them. It is this transition that gives the story much of its particular atmosphere. The fairy tale does not describe a world in which magic has completely vanished. Instead, it shows a world in which people have gradually lost the ability to see it. Before long, the unicorn encounters the first travelers. To most of them, she appears to be nothing more than an ordinary white horse. Only a few still possess the ability to perceive her true form. The film never explains this in great detail, yet the idea becomes one of its most important themes. It can be understood as an image of human perception. The unicorn itself has not changed. What has changed is the way people look at her. They see only what they already expect to see. The idea is familiar from many old fairy tales. The marvelous does not reveal itself equally to everyone. It requires openness, imagination, and sometimes a certain kind of innocence. Those who search only for what is obvious may overlook something extraordinary, even when it stands directly before them. One of the first people to recognize the unicorn for what she truly is Mommy Fortuna. She travels with a wandering circus whose attractions are presented as fantastic creatures. Yet behind the spectacle, a rather sad truth soon becomes apparent. Most of these supposed wonders are merely ordinary animals, altered with paint, masks, or artificial horns. A lion is presented as a manticore. A monkey becomes a grotesque creature of fantasy. A bear is made to resemble an unknown monster. The visitors willingly believe in these illusions, not necessarily because they are convincing, but because the people themselves still long for wonders. At the same time, they have lost the ability to recognize a genuine one. There is a quiet irony in this. People pay to admire false wonders, while the only real unicorn among them stands unnoticed. Mommy Fortuna herself is an exception. She truly sees the unicorn for what she is. Unlike the visitors, she possesses enough knowledge of old magic to understand what stands before her. Yet she does not respond with reverence. She places the unicorn inside a cage. This is one of the first moments in which the film begins to explore the complicated relationship between beauty and possession. Mommy Fortuna loves things that are wondrous, but her way of loving them is not to leave them free. It is to make them hers. She wants to keep the unicorn because she senses that creatures like her may soon disappear forever. In her own mind, perhaps, she is protecting something precious. In reality, she has taken away the very freedom that belongs to its nature. The thought reaches far beyond the boundaries of the fairy tale. Human beings often try to hold on to beautiful things. We preserve memories. We conserve works of art. We photograph passing moments. We build museums around what we fear losing. And yet some things lose part of their essence precisely when we try to keep them. The unicorn does not belong behind bars. Her nature is to move freely through forests and open spaces. Once she becomes an exhibit, her appearance may remain unchanged, but something essential has already been taken from her. The other creatures in the circus tell a similar story. Although many of them are only ordinary animals, they appear exhausted and resigned. They have been forced into roles that were never truly their own. The film does not need to explain this directly. The cages are enough. There is a quiet sadness in them. Among the creatures, one stands apart from the others, the harpy Celino. Unlike the rest of the circus attractions, she is genuinely a creature of mythology. Like the unicorn, she has been captured by Mommy Fortuna. In Greek mythology, harpies are winged beings with aspects of both human and bird. They are often associated with divine punishment, destruction, or forces of nature that cannot easily be restrained. The film draws upon some of these older ideas while transforming them into something of its own. Sileno appears ancient, unpredictable, and at the same time strangely beautiful. She does not possess a human sense of morality. She simply acts according to her nature. This creates an interesting contrast between her and the unicorn. Both belong to a world that humanity has almost forgotten. Yet where the unicorn represents compassion and harmony, the harpy embodies a more primal form of wildness, something that refuses to be controlled. Then the awkward magician Schmendrick enters the story, and the paths of all these characters begin to change. Schmendrick is one of the more unusual figures in fantasy. Unlike the traditional image of the all-powerful wizard, he possesses considerable knowledge, but very little control over his own abilities. His spells frequently produce results that are quite different from what he intended. But this is more than a source of humor. Schmendrick represents a person who possesses great potential while still being uncertain of his own purpose. As the story progresses, that uncertainty gradually becomes one of his greatest strengths. Through a chain of failed spells and unexpected consequences, he eventually helps free the unicorn. At the same time, Sileno escapes from her cage as well. The encounter that follows between Sileno and Mommy Fortuna is among the film's most striking moments. The harpy immediately understands who has taken away her freedom. Her response does not feel like revenge in the ordinary human sense. Instead, it resembles the restoration of a natural order that had been artificially interrupted. The film leaves the exact fate of Mommy Fortuna somewhat understated. It does not linger over punishment or explain every consequence in detail. This restraint strengthens the scene. Sometimes the unknown can leave a deeper impression than anything shown explicitly. With the circus finally behind them, Schmendrick and the unicorn continue their journey together. For the first time, there is a sense of companionship. The unicorn is no longer entirely alone. Schmendrick possesses neither extraordinary strength nor perfect wisdom. Yet he chooses to follow her, not because he expects a reward, and not because anyone commands him to do so, but because he begins to understand that his own future is somehow tied to this journey. The tone of the story changes with this realization. What began as a solitary search slowly becomes a shared path. The fairy tale begins to suggest that even extraordinary beings may need companions, not because they are weak, but because understanding is rarely something we reach entirely on our own. And so, the journey continues through a world that has almost forgotten its wonders. Yet within that forgetting, there remains a quiet trace of hope. For as long as there are still people capable of recognizing a unicorn when they see one, the connection between magic and humanity has not completely disappeared. As the unicorn continues her journey, Schmendrick gradually moves closer to the center of the story. At first glance, he possesses few of the qualities we might expect from a traditional hero. He is awkward, uncertain of himself, and repeatedly finds himself in situations that expose just how little control he has over his own abilities. And yet, this is precisely what makes him one of the most human figures in the film. Fantasy stories often tell of extraordinary people who recognize their destiny early in life. Schmendrick represents the opposite. He knows that great magical power lies somewhere within him, but he cannot command it at will. Every spell is a gamble. Sometimes it succeeds, but just as often it produces something entirely different from what he intended. This uncertainty has followed him for a very long time. The film suggests that Schmendrick has been given an unusually long life through an ancient curse. He barely ages, yet he cannot fulfill the purpose of that extended existence until he becomes a truly great magician. His history is mentioned only briefly, but it carries an important symbolic meaning. It suggests that true maturity is not measured simply by the number of years we have lived. A person can live for a very long time and still be searching for an understanding of who they are. This idea appears in many philosophical traditions. Time alone does not necessarily create wisdom. It is experience, choice, and the willingness to accept responsibility that can transform knowledge into understanding. Schmendrick carries countless spells and fragments of magical knowledge within him, yet what he lacks at first is trust in his own ability. In this way, he becomes a particularly fitting companion for the unicorn. The unicorn possesses complete clarity about her own nature. She never doubts what she is. Schmendrick, on the other hand, knows that he has a destination, but has no certainty about how he is meant to reach it. Together, they represent two different kinds of searching. The unicorn is searching for her kind. Schmendrick is searching for himself. And the longer they travel together, the more clearly their paths begin to influence one another. The unicorn encounters the imperfections of humanity. Schmendrick, meanwhile, encounters a being that reminds him of what magic may once have meant. Not power, not domination, but wonder. In many modern fantasy stories, magic functions as a tool. It solves problems, wins battles, or reshapes the world according to the wishes of those who wield it. The last unicorn presents something quieter. Here, magic has a nature of its own. It cannot be completely controlled. It follows laws that do not belong to the magician. The wizard is not truly its master. He is more like its companion. This idea recalls older European fairy tales, as well as many mythological traditions. In such stories, magic often appears as a force of nature, something that demands respect rather than obedience. Those who try to use it purely for their own purposes frequently discover that control is an illusion. Schmendrick experiences something very similar. He does not fail because he is evil. He fails because he tries to force something that still needs time to grow. And within this lies one of the film's more enduring ideas. Not every ability can be developed through effort alone. Some abilities become complete only when a person is finally ready to accept responsibility for someone beyond themselves. Throughout their journey, Schmendrick and the unicorn encounter ordinary people. These brief encounters reveal much about the world they are passing through. Many people go through their entire lives without ever encountering a genuine wonder. Others have already abandoned the hope that such things might exist, and some continue to repeat old legends even though they themselves no longer truly believe them. The film thus creates the image of a society slowly drifting away from its myths. This does not mean that people have completely lost their imagination. They still tell stories, they still sing songs, they still remember ancient kings and heroes whose names have nearly faded from memory. But these memories feel increasingly distant, like dreams remembered only after waking. Reality has settled over the fairy tales, and within such a world, every encounter with genuine magic takes on a particular importance. It reminds the characters that their world was once larger than they now believe. One of the most remarkable aspects of the film is that almost no one deliberately sets out to destroy magic. Most people have simply stopped believing in it. There is something strangely relevant about this idea even now. Not everything disappears because it is destroyed. Some things disappear because no one is looking anymore. In this way, forgetting itself becomes a quiet kind of force. Peter S. Beagle draws upon an idea found throughout many traditional fairy tales, that wonders often remain present only as long as people are willing to make room for them. This does not necessarily mean believing literally in mythical creatures. It can also mean retaining the ability to recognize beauty, compassion, and wonder within ordinary life. And as Schmendrick slowly begins to discover himself, the unicorn begins to change as well. On the outside, she remains exactly as she was. Within her, however, something has begun to move. She observes human joy and human fear. She encounters deception, greed, and compassion. For the first time, she exists permanently beyond the protected forest, where everything once seemed to have its proper place. These experiences leave traces. At first, the unicorn herself can hardly understand them. But the film is quietly preparing one of the most important transformations in the entire story. The unicorn is not only going to search for the others of her kind. Little by little, she will also begin to discover what it means to experience human emotions. From a modern perspective, this development may seem almost inevitable. Yet the film never announces it loudly. Instead of relying on dramatic warnings, it works through small changes. A glance that lasts a little longer, a moment of hesitation, a quiet uncertainty. This restraint is part of what gives the story its particular strength. It trusts that some changes do not need to be explained. They can simply be felt. By this point, the journey has become quieter than it was before, yet somehow more meaningful. The search for the vanished unicorns remains the visible purpose of the journey. Beneath it, however, another story is beginning to take shape. It is the story of a magician learning to trust the gift within himself. And it is the story of an immortal creature slowly approaching an experience that has always been foreign to her: vulnerability. Neither transformation happens all at once. Both remain almost invisible at first. But that is precisely what makes them believable. As in nature, the most important changes rarely announce themselves. They grow quietly, almost unnoticed, until one day there comes a moment when the world can no longer return to what it was before. After a long journey, Schmendrick and the unicorn arrive in the forest of the outlaw Captain Cully. Here, the story changes in a way that at first seems almost imperceptible. The setting is not filled with great magic, nor does it possess the splendor of ancient kingdoms. Instead, the unicorn encounters people who have built their lives somewhere between small hopes and great disappointments. Among them is Molly Grue. At first, she seems almost out of place in a fairy tale. She wears simple clothes. Her face carries the marks of a life already well lived. She possesses neither supernatural abilities nor an important title. And yet, she becomes one of the most significant figures in the entire story. Because Molly represents something that fairy tales rarely show. She represents the person who comes after the dreams have faded. Very little is revealed about her past. Much of it is deliberately left unspoken. Still, it becomes clear that Molly once imagined a different kind of life. Perhaps she dreamed of adventures, of heroes, or of a world in which wonders were still possible. Somehow, her path eventually led her to a band of outlaws. The film does not judge that choice, nor does it explain it in great detail. It simply accepts it as part of a life that has already been lived. There is an unusual honesty in that. Fairy tales often begin with young people standing at the beginning of their journey. The Last Unicorn also turns its attention toward those who have already made many choices and who have spent years living with what those choices brought them. Molly is not a heroine waiting to discover who she will become. She already carries her experiences with her. When she encounters the unicorn for the first time, one of the film's most moving moments unfolds. She recognizes the unicorn immediately, but instead of responding with simple joy, she is overcome by sorrow. Through her tears, she wonders why the unicorn has come only now. Why now? Why not years ago? Why not when she was young? Why not during those years when she still believed in wonders? These few words reach far beyond the unicorn itself. They are, in a deeper sense, about being human. Molly gives voice to something many people eventually come to understand. There are wishes that do not hurt merely because they remain unfulfilled. They hurt because they are fulfilled too late. The film does not remain with this moment for very long, yet the feeling it creates continues long after the scene has passed. Molly's reaction is often understood as an expression of lost youth and dreams that never came to pass. She encounters the wonder she may have been waiting for, but only after years marked by disappointment. And so her response contains both happiness and grief. That mixture is what makes her so remarkable. She does not envy the unicorn. She does not blame her. Her words seem directed toward something much larger than either of them, toward time itself, toward the fact that life does not always know when a moment should arrive. In philosophical terms, the scene touches upon a question that has troubled people for centuries. Is there truly a right moment for anything? Or do we often understand the value of a moment only after it has already passed? Molly receives no answer, yet the unicorn responds to her with a quiet kind of kindness. It does not reject her feelings. It does not tell her that everything happens for a reason. It simply remains there. Perhaps there is comfort in that alone. Not every sorrow needs to be solved. Sometimes it is enough to be seen. From this moment onward, the relationship between the human characters and the unicorn begins to change. Until now, the unicorn has primarily been an observer. Now she begins to encounter human emotion more directly. Molly brings warmth into the small group. Where Schmendrick is often accompanied by uncertainty, Molly possesses a remarkable sense of groundedness. She knows hunger, exhaustion, fear, and disappointment. Yet none of these experiences have taken away her ability to care for others. In this way, a quiet balance begins to form. Schmendrick represents the hope of what might still become. Molly carries the memory of what has already been lost, and the unicorn moves between them. This small group gives the journey a new depth. It is no longer carried solely by the search for the vanished unicorns. It becomes a meeting between different stages of life and between people who have experienced hope in very different ways. There is also something revealing in Molly's relationship with Cully. The outlaw captain initially resembles a familiar fairy tale figure. He presents himself as a noble outlaw and dreams of the reputation of legendary bandits. His followers try to preserve the image of romantic heroes, even though their actual lives are considerably less grand. There is a quiet melancholy in this. Cully, too, lives partly through stories. He performs a role that may never have truly belonged to him. Once again, the film shows how deeply people can be shaped by the stories they tell themselves. Some attempt to imitate legends, others cling to memories, and some spend their lives waiting for a wonder that never seems to arrive. The unicorn encounters all these different forms of human longing, and with each one, she learns something new. Molly, meanwhile, quickly develops a deep connection with this mysterious creature. Her affection is not based on admiration alone. She does not simply see the unicorn as something beautiful and unreachable. Instead, she recognizes in her a reminder that beauty and purity may still exist somewhere in the world. Perhaps that is why she chooses to accompany Schmendrick and the unicorn on their journey. Her decision comes without great ceremony. No speech is needed. No one speaks of destiny. Molly simply goes with them. The film seems to understand that the most important decisions in life are often made quietly. Once she becomes part of the small group, the rhythm of the story changes as well. There are more quiet conversations now, small gestures, and moments in which the characters simply share the same silence. These apparently ordinary moments give the story much of its humanity. It is not the great battles that carry the film. It is the encounters, the glances, the thoughts that remain unspoken. This is one of the qualities that sets The Last Unicorn apart from many fantasy films of its time. The story continues to move forward, yet it repeatedly pauses long enough for its characters simply to exist beside one another. These moments of stillness create space for reflection, and they give the events that follow their emotional weight. As the journey continues, the clues surrounding the mysterious Red Bull and King Haggard begin to gather. It becomes increasingly clear that the disappearance of the unicorns was not simply an accident. Somewhere behind it stands a single will, with motives that have not yet been revealed. The answers are drawing closer, and yet, so is the sense that discovering them will come at a price. Because every truth changes the people who search for it. And the unicorn, too, has already begun to change. At first, almost imperceptibly, but inevitably. As the small group draws closer to its destination, the story's attention slowly turns toward the figure who has seemed to linger like a quiet shadow over everything that has happened. Until now, King Haggard has been little more than a name, associated with rumors of the Red Bull and the disappearance of the unicorns. Only gradually does it become clear that behind this name stands one of the most unusual figures in fantasy. Haggard is not a ruler who impresses through power or cruelty. He seems tired. His castle appears abandoned. His kingdom possesses neither the splendor of a great royal court nor the wealth one might expect from a king. Even from a distance, the castle creates a peculiar impression. It stands upon steep cliffs above the sea. Its stone walls appear old, almost worn smooth by the wind. The high battlements do not seem to protect a flourishing court. They seem to surround little more than silence. This design is not merely decorative. In The Last Unicorn, architecture often tells us as much about a character as the character's own words. The unicorn's forest was open, living, and shaped by gentle forms. Haggard's castle, by contrast, is made of stone, sharp lines, and empty spaces. Nature seems to have withdrawn from it. Even the sea beneath the cliffs does not feel liberating. It appears vast, distant, and heavy. The castle is often understood as a reflection of its ruler. It is less a fortress against enemies outside than an expression of something empty within. When King Haggard finally appears, his appearance may surprise those expecting a traditional fairy tale villain. He wears no magnificent armor. He does not speak with a booming voice. His movements are slow, almost without strength. That restraint makes him all the more unsettling. His face seems marked by a profound weariness. His words are quiet, sometimes almost casual. And yet there is a sense that behind them lies a pain accumulated over many years. The film does not rush to condemn Haggard. Instead, it first presents him as someone who has almost lost the ability to experience joy. This is one of the story's most remarkable choices. Many fairy tales explain evil through greed, hatred, or the desire for power. Haggard follows a different path. He suffers. From early on, he suggests that almost nothing can truly move him anymore. Neither wealth nor kingship can give him satisfaction. His kingdom means little to him. Other people often seem distant and unimportant. Even the beauty surrounding his castle appears unable to reach him. There is, however, one thing that once affected him deeply: the sight of unicorns. The film presents this not simply as admiration. Haggard describes seeing the unicorns as the first time he ever truly felt alive. Here, one of the central ideas of the entire story begins to emerge. What happens when someone believes that happiness existed only once in their life? Many people carry memories that seem more precious than everything that came afterward. A particular place, someone we once loved, a summer from childhood, a brief moment in which everything seemed complete. Usually, such memories remain where they belong, in the past. Haggard, however, refuses to let his memory remain there. He tries to hold on to the one moment in which he felt happy. And that is where his tragedy begins. Instead of preserving the memory, he attempts to possess the thing that created it. Once again, the story returns to a theme already present in Mommy Fortuna. Both characters encounter something wondrous. Both believe that they must hold on to it. And both fail to understand that beauty, by its very nature, cannot truly be owned. Their motivations, however, are very different. Mommy Fortuna acts out of fascination. Haggard acts out of despair. That difference makes him a far more tragic figure. The film suggests that Haggard does not necessarily take pleasure in causing suffering. Instead, almost everything else has become meaningless to him. The unicorns become a final answer to the emptiness inside him, a last source of feeling in a life that has grown almost completely numb. Philosophically, this recalls an idea that can be found as far back as ancient thought. Human beings often confuse possessing something with possessing the experience that once came from it. But the two are not the same. A landscape does not remain beautiful simply because someone owns it. A melody does not become more meaningful because it belongs to someone. And a unicorn does not exist in order to be possessed. It represents freedom. By trying to imprison that freedom, Haggard destroys the very quality that moved him in the first place. The film never states this lesson directly. It allows us to discover it through Haggard's actions. Perhaps nowhere is this more painful than in his relationship with his adopted son, Prince Lear. Lear approaches Haggard with respect. He seeks his approval and tries to become the person the king expects him to be. Yet Haggard remains emotionally distant. He seems almost incapable of accepting genuine human closeness. Their relationship reveals just how far his inner numbness has spread. The king has someone who loves him, and yet he can barely see that love. Instead, his attention continues to return to the unicorns. There is a quiet tragedy in this as well. Sometimes people spend their lives searching desperately for something distant and extraordinary, while something precious is already standing beside them. The film does not turn this into a moral accusation. It simply describes a human experience. When someone becomes completely consumed by an unattainable desire, it becomes easy to overlook what is already there. Meanwhile, Schmendrick, Molly, and the unicorn continue toward the castle. By now, their journey has changed. At first, the question was simply whether the other unicorns were still alive. Now another question has become impossible to ignore. Why did Haggard search for them in the first place? The answer is not simple cruelty. It is profound loneliness. And this gives the coming conflict a different kind of meaning. The unicorn will not merely face a cruel enemy. She will encounter a human being who has tied the meaning of his entire existence to something that can never truly belong to him. That realization changes the way the whole story can be understood. This is no longer simply a struggle between good and evil. It is a meeting between two entirely different ideas of where happiness comes from. The unicorn represents a life lived according to one's own nature. Haggard represents the attempt to make a fleeting moment last forever. Between these two ways of existing, the story moves steadily toward its turning point. The travelers do not yet know what it will cost them, but already The castle above the sea feels like a place from which no one can leave entirely unchanged. As the journey draws closer to its destination, it becomes increasingly clear that the story does not belong only to the unicorn and King Haggard. Between these two figures moves someone whose development may seem quiet at first, yet who comes to embody one of the film's most important ideas. That person is Prince Lear. When we first encounter him, he seems almost like the embodiment of a traditional fairy tale prince. He rides through the forests in search of dragons and adventure, dreaming of heroic deeds. His understanding of the world has been shaped by stories of knights, quests, and glorious victories. And there is a gentle irony in this. Lear lives in a world where the old fairy tales are already beginning to fade. Yet he still tries to live according to their rules. He wants to be a hero because he believes that becoming one will give his life meaning. At first, this desire seems almost innocent. He looks for danger so that he can prove his courage. He hopes for challenges in which good and evil can be clearly distinguished. But the world around him has already become far more complicated. Its greatest threat does not wear armor. It does not hide in a dark cave. It sits upon a throne, and it is made not of hatred, but of profound sadness. Lear does not understand this at first. To him, King Haggard is his father, or more precisely, the man who adopted him. The film suggests that Haggard took the boy into his household long ago, but never gave him the warmth and recognition that a child naturally longs for. That relationship shapes Lear more deeply than he realizes. He continually seeks his father's approval. Every heroic deed becomes a way of proving that he is worthy. Every challenge he overcomes seems to promise that perhaps, finally, he will receive the affection that has always remained distant. There is a great deal of psychological depth in this dynamic. Children often develop their understanding of themselves through the reactions of the people closest to them. When recognition remains absent for a long time, it can become easy to believe that love must first be earned. Lear seems to live according to precisely this idea. He does not simply assume that he deserves to be loved. He tries to become worthy of love through achievement. The film never states this openly, but his actions allow such an interpretation, and it forms an important part of the way his character can be understood. When Lear encounters Schmendrick, Molly, and the unicorn, he initially sees only a small group of travelers, not so different from any others he might meet on the road. Like most people in this world, he does not immediately perceive the unicorn in her true form. He sees an unusually beautiful white horse. But gradually, his perception changes. Not because the unicorn has changed, because he has. This is one of the ideas that quietly runs through the entire film. Magic does not force itself upon those who refuse to see it. It reveals itself to those who become capable of looking beyond what is immediately apparent. As Schmendrick and Molly continue their journey, a quiet connection begins to form between Lear and the unicorn. At first, it is based simply on respect. Lear does not approach the mysterious creature with the desire to possess her. He is filled with wonder, and this places him in fundamental contrast with King Haggard. Both men recognize beauty, but only one of them wants to keep it. The other wants to protect it. Here, one of the central ideas of the film begins to unfold. Love is not possession. It is the willingness to give another being room to remain what it is. This thought runs like a quiet thread through the entire story. It appears not only in the relationships between its characters, but also in the way the film approaches nature, magic, and memory. To love is not necessarily to hold on. Sometimes love means allowing the other to remain free. There are echoes of this idea in many philosophical and spiritual traditions. Ancient thinkers often distinguished between desire and forms of love that transcend simple possession. Many religious traditions likewise describe love not as ownership, but as devotion and self-giving. The last unicorn translates this idea into the language of a fairy tale. Lear understands it at first without fully realizing that he does. He acts out of compassion. He helps without expecting anything in return. And through those simple actions, he gradually becomes more than the person he once believed he needed to be. What is especially interesting is that the film does not describe his transformation through spectacular heroic deeds. Lear certainly shows courage, but his most important moments are quieter. He listens, he trusts, he remains. These seemingly small decisions change him more deeply than any battle could. In this respect, the story differs from many traditional adventure tales. Courage does not exist only in the willingness to confront an enemy. It can also mean allowing oneself to become vulnerable. Lear possesses that kind of openness. He encounters both people and, eventually, the unicorn, without surrendering to cynicism. Even though his world contains disappointment, he continues to believe that kindness has value. The film does not present this as weakness. Quite the opposite. It becomes the quiet source of his strength. Meanwhile, the atmosphere around Haggard's castle grows heavier. The mysterious Red Bull remains unseen, yet its presence seems to exist everywhere. Servants speak of it reluctantly. The ancient walls appear to hold memories of their own. Even the sea beneath the cliffs seems to carry an old secret within its endless movement. The small group senses that they are approaching a turning point. Schmendrick understands that his magic will soon demand more from him than knowledge alone. Molly senses that the journey is leading toward truths from which even hope may not be able to protect her. And the unicorn begins to understand something else. The human world is not made entirely of loss. It also contains love. That realization may seem simple to us. For an immortal creature, it is not. The unicorn has known harmony, but not human affection. She has known beauty, but not the kind of love that becomes precious precisely because it cannot last forever. This experience will soon change everything, because some encounters leave traces that even an immortal being cannot simply shed. The film prepares this transformation with remarkable patience. It never forces it into existence. It allows it to grow naturally through glances, conversations, and the quiet time the characters spend together. And because of that, what comes next does not feel like a sudden turn. It feels inevitable, not like a surprise, but like the natural movement of a story that from its very beginning has been quietly asking what it truly means to be alive. Every great fairy tale reaches a moment when its inner center begins to shift. In The Last Unicorn, this does not happen through a battle or a sudden revelation. The decisive change begins with a transformation. When Schmendrick realizes that the Red Bull is drawing ever closer to the unicorn, he makes a fateful choice. The magic that has failed him so many times finally obeys him in this crucial moment. To protect the unicorn from the bull, he transforms her into a human woman. The last unicorn becomes Lady Amalthea. This moment marks the deepest turning point in the entire story. Until now, the unicorn has been observing humanity from the outside. Now she becomes part of its world. The transformation carries two meanings at once. Outwardly, only her form has changed. Within, she remains the same creature at first. Schmendrick intends the spell to be temporary. Once the danger has passed, he hopes to undo it. But transformations rarely leave everything untouched. The longer Amalthea lives as a human being, the more her inner world begins to change as well. The film portrays this transformation with extraordinary restraint. There is no single moment when the unicorn suddenly loses her identity. Instead, it happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, like water shaping stone over the course of many years. At first, Amalthea seems unfamiliar even to herself within her new body. She moves cautiously. Sounds, touches, and sensations feel strange. Her manner of speaking remains quiet and distant, as though part of her still belongs to another reality. But the human body has its own way of experiencing the world. It knows tiredness, it knows fear, it knows longing, and above all, it knows time. A unicorn experiences existence through a different sense of duration. Its life is not confined to a few short decades. Change unfolds on an entirely different scale. Human beings, by contrast, live with an awareness of their own limits. And because life is finite, human emotions can possess an unusual intensity. The film now begins to explore, very gently, how this new experience changes Amalthea. At first, it is only in small things. She feels cold. She is startled. She becomes tired and needs to rest. Sensations that seem completely ordinary to human beings are entirely new to her. Gradually, other experiences follow: uncertainty, compassion, sadness, joy. The boundaries between her original nature and her human experience begin to blur. Schmendrick watches this development with growing concern. He realizes that his magic has become more powerful than he expected. It is not only the unicorn's body that has changed. Her perception is changing as well. Here, the film touches upon a philosophical question that has occupied human thought for centuries. How closely are body and consciousness connected? Does the way we live change the way we think? Or does the true self remain independent of whatever form the body takes? The Last Unicorn offers no definitive answer. Instead, it suggests that identity may not be something completely fixed. Experiences leave traces. They can expand the way we understand the world, and sometimes even the way we understand ourselves. For Amalthea, this is a painful kind of gain. She loses something of her original innocence, but she gains something that had previously been foreign to her: humanity. This becomes especially visible in her relationship with Prince Lear. Lear does not approach Amalthea as a mysterious creature from an ancient legend. He encounters her as a woman. He falls in love with her not because of some supernatural aura, but because of her quiet, thoughtful nature and the gentleness with which she moves through the world. The film treats their love with unusual restraint. There are no grand declarations, no dramatic gestures. Instead, closeness grows through shared moments: a conversation, a glance, a quiet presence beside another person. That restraint gives their relationship a sense of authenticity. Love does not appear as an instant destiny. It grows slowly through trust. For Amalthea, however, this experience is both beautiful and frightening. For the first time, she feels something she had never known as a unicorn. She wants to stay, and that desire frightens her, because it means that she is beginning to forget the purpose for which she originally entered the human world. The film never makes this inner conflict loud. Amalthea rarely speaks openly about what she is feeling, yet her uncertainty can be seen in the way she moves through each encounter. She remembers where she came from, and at the same time, she feels the pull of a life she had never intended to seek. This part of the story is often understood as an image of growing into adulthood. The unicorn loses some of her innocent distance from the world. She discovers that love also means vulnerability, and that every deep attachment contains the possibility of loss. Many of the film's quiet details support this interpretation. Amalthea smiles more often. Her silences begin to feel different. Her gaze lingers longer on the people around her. The world is no longer merely somewhere she is passing through. It becomes a place where she might, perhaps, put down roots. Molly Grue notices this change as well. She watches Amalthea with both happiness and concern. On one hand, she sees the unicorn experiencing something that enriches her. On the other, she senses that every further change may make the path back more difficult. Schmendrick feels something similar. He carries responsibility for the spell and increasingly understands that his decision may have consequences he cannot completely undo. Once again, the story approaches one of its quiet central ideas. Some choices can be corrected, others cannot. Even when everything appears to be restored, the memory remains. Experience changes a person, and perhaps it can change a unicorn as well. As Amalthea becomes more open to her human nature, King Haggard begins to watch her with increasing attention. Something about her affects him in a way he cannot explain. Although he does not recognize her true identity, he feels strangely drawn toward her. He tells her that she makes him sad. The sentence is one of the film's most mysterious. It can be understood in several ways. One common interpretation is that Haggard unconsciously recognizes the unicorn within Amalthea, not through reason, but through the deep longing that has shaped his entire existence. He senses the nearness of what he has spent his life searching for without being able to give it a name. The film never confirms this interpretation explicitly, and perhaps that is precisely why it remains so compelling. The threads of the story are now drawing together. Love, memory, loss, and identity are approaching a point where they can no longer remain separate. The transformation that was meant only as protection has already begun to alter the fate of everyone involved. And for the first time, there is a quiet possibility that the unicorn herself is no longer certain she wants to return to the life she once knew. Throughout the story, many of the important figures reveal something of what lies within them. Schmendrick speaks of his uncertainty. Molly carries the longing for what she has lost. King Haggard reveals the emptiness that has consumed him. Even Prince Lear undergoes a visible transformation. Only one presence remains almost entirely without a voice. The Red Bull. He is one of the most striking beings in the entire film, precisely because so little about him is explained. He has no long speeches, no recognizable history, and no motives that can easily be understood in human terms. His power comes from something much simpler: his presence. Whenever he appears, the atmosphere changes. The world seems to fall silent. The colors become darker. The ground appears to tremble beneath his hooves. Even his appearance sets him apart from most other creatures of fantasy. The bull wears no ornaments, carries no royal symbols, and shows no signs of an individual personality. His body seems almost shaped from fire and shadow. His eyes do not express anger in any ordinary human sense. They appear empty, almost impersonal. And it is precisely this emptiness that makes him frightening. The film never tries to turn the Red Bull into a human character. He does not hate. He does not celebrate. He does not seem to take pleasure in victory. He simply fulfills his purpose. There is something deeply unsettling about that. It makes him feel inevitable. The Red Bull is often understood as the embodiment of some elemental force. The film never clearly defines what that force is, and over the years, this openness has allowed several interpretations to emerge. One of the most common interpretations sees the bull as a symbol of fear. Not one particular fear, but the more fundamental fear that causes living creatures to flee when confronted with something they cannot overcome. The bull pursues the unicorns. He does not need to fight them. He drives them before him. That distinction is important. His greatest power does not necessarily lie in physical violence. It lies in creating panic. The unicorns flee from him to the very edge of the world. Eventually, he drives them into the sea, where they remain trapped. The film never explicitly explains why the unicorns are so afraid of him, and that silence leaves room for interpretation. Some may see in it the suggestion that even purity is not free from fear. Others understand the Red Bull as an image of impermanence itself. Even an immortal creature must eventually confront a force that appears greater than its own innocence. This interpretation gains further meaning when the story is viewed as a whole. Again and again, the film returns to the ending of one state of existence. Childhood passes, memories fade, love changes people. Beauty cannot be held forever. The Red Bull could be seen as an embodiment of all these processes, not as an expression of evil, but as a law of existence. The film itself does not confirm this interpretation directly. It belongs to the broader field of interpretation rather than to the established facts of the story. His connection to King Haggard is equally intriguing. At first, it appears that Haggard commands the bull. Yet the closer we look, the more complicated their relationship becomes. The king gives orders, but there is never a complete sense of control. The Red Bull seems less like a possession and more like a force of nature that has, for a time, been placed at Haggard's service. Even Haggard treats him with caution. This recalls many mythological stories in which rulers attempt to command forces that ultimately remain greater than themselves. Human beings believe they can control nature. In truth, they remain dependent upon it. This is what makes Haggard's power feel so fragile. He does not truly own the Red Bull. He exists alongside a force that could, at any moment, escape the limits of his influence. As Amalthea becomes increasingly connected to her human nature, the danger around her grows as well. Haggard begins to sense that there is something hidden within her. The bull seems to sense her presence too, and Schmendrick eventually realizes that the decisive moment is drawing near. His concern is no longer limited to the danger outside. He is afraid that Amalthea may lose herself. The longer she lives as a human being, the weaker her memory of her life as a unicorn becomes. Two different forms of fear now meet. One is embodied by the Red Bull. The other exists within Amalthea herself. The fear of no longer recognizing who you are. This second fear is quieter, but no less powerful. Many people experience changes throughout their lives that they could never have imagined beforehand. Decisions, relationships, and losses gradually shape the person they become. And eventually, there may come a moment when we wonder whether we are still the same person we once were. Amalthea faces something similar. She does not change simply because she chooses to. She changes because life itself is changing her. The film treats this process with remarkable gentleness. It does not judge it. It simply shows that every experience carries a price. Prince Lear also begins to notice the deep sadness that follows Amalthea. He does not understand where it comes from, but he senses that her thoughts often seem to drift toward a place he cannot reach. And once again, this reveals something important about the way the film portrays love. Lear does not try to keep Amalthea from changing. He does not force her to stay close. He meets her sadness with patience. In this, he once again stands apart from King Haggard. Haggard wants to possess. Lear wants to understand. This contrast is one of the story's most delicate structures. Both men are drawn to something they consider extraordinary, but only one of them accepts that love requires freedom. Meanwhile, the events within Haggard's castle continue to gather toward a single point. The castle seems quieter than before, almost as though it were holding its breath. The long corridors, bare stone walls, and constant sound of the sea reinforce the feeling that everyone is approaching a moment from which there will be no turning back. This reveals another distinctive quality of the film's storytelling. It rarely creates tension through rapid action. It relies on anticipation, on silence, on space. The castle therefore feels less like the residence of a king and more like a place suspended between past and future. a place where certain decisions can no longer be postponed. Eventually, it becomes clear that the truth about the vanished unicorns lies hidden beneath the castle itself. The path leads downward into the depths, almost as though the story must first descend into darkness before it can find its way back toward the light. This image has a long history. In countless myths, heroes descend into caves, underworlds, or labyrinths before returning transformed. The descent often represents an encounter with the deepest fears and truths hidden within. The last unicorn uses a similar image. Yet, as so often in this story, it does so without explaining it. Only the wind moving across the cliffs, the distant thunder of waves below, and somewhere in the darkness, the Red Bull waits. Beneath the walls of King Haggard's castle, the search for the vanished unicorns finally reaches its destination. Yet, as so often happens in The Last Unicorn, the climax is not defined only by what happens in the outside world. The deepest transformation takes place within the characters themselves. The path leads far below the castle. The chambers seem older than the fortress above them. Moisture gathers on the stones. The distant sound of the sea reaches through narrow openings in the rock, reminding us that everything here exists at the boundary between land and water. Even this place carries a particular symbolic weight. Since ancient times, the sea has often been associated with the unconscious, with origins, and with the unknown. It conceals what cannot be seen. Its surface may appear calm, while beneath it lie depths that cannot be fully understood. It is there that King Haggard has hidden the unicorns, not inside an ordinary prison of iron, but behind a boundary guarded by fear. When Amalthea encounters the Red Bull once again, we can see how deeply her transformation has already taken hold. Once, the unicorn would simply have fled. Now Amalthea experiences something more complicated. She knows the fear of death. She knows doubt. She knows hesitation. These emotions make her more vulnerable, but they also give her something she did not possess before: courage. Fear and courage may seem like opposites, yet the film suggests that they are closely connected. Courage does not exist in the absence of fear. It begins precisely where fear has to be faced. A creature that can never experience fear cannot truly be courageous. It is simply following its nature. Amalthea, however, chooses to stand against the Red Bull. Her experience as a human being has therefore become a source of a new kind of strength. Schmendrick realizes at this moment that his task is not yet complete. The magic that has accompanied him throughout his life now reveals what it can truly become. For perhaps the first time, he acts without vanity, without uncertainty, and without any need to prove himself. He acts only to protect others. In that moment, his transformation is complete. Many stories tell of heroes discovering that they possess great power. The Last Unicorn tells something more subtle. Schmendrick may have possessed that power for a very long time. He simply could not fully use it because too much of his attention was still turned toward himself. Only when the well-being of others becomes more important than his own reputation does his magic finally reach the clarity he has been searching for. This recalls many older stories in which true mastery does not come from technical perfection, but from inner maturity. Magic no longer serves the magician. It serves life. As the Red Bull drives Amalthea before him, Prince Lear places himself between them. It is one of the quietest and most meaningful moments in the film. Lear knows that he is physically no match for the bull. He fights anyway, not because he expects to win, but because Amalthea needs to be protected. This reveals how completely his understanding of heroism has changed. At the beginning of the story, he dreamed of glory. Now he no longer thinks about himself. He acts out of love. The film does not treat love here as an emotion alone. Love becomes a decision, a willingness to accept responsibility even when the outcome cannot be known. This is one of the most mature ideas in the entire story. Love does not mean wanting to possess another person. It means being willing to place another's well-being before your own. Lear pays a terrible price for that choice. In the struggle against the Red Bull, he is mortally wounded. The film portrays the moment with remarkable restraint. There is no exaggerated drama, and perhaps that is what makes his loss so affecting. The fairy tale reminds us that courage does not always protect us from consequences. Good choices do not guarantee a happy ending. For Amalthea, this moment becomes a profound rupture. For the first time, she experiences the pain of irreversible loss. As a unicorn, this experience had been foreign to her. Now, it reaches her completely. And it is through this grief that something decisive happens. Schmendrick realizes that Amalthea must return to her original form. He breaks the spell. The unicorn returns. Outwardly, everything appears as it once was, but inwardly, nothing is the same. Here, the film reaches perhaps its most important philosophical idea. We can return to an earlier state, but we can never return as exactly the same person. The unicorn has her immortal form again, yet the memory of love, fear, and loss remains. The true transformation was never simply that the unicorn became human. It was that she experienced something human and carried that experience back with her. She is now a unicorn who knows regret, who has known love, who has experienced grief. And this experience has not diminished her. It has made her more complete. In this moment, the Red Bull confronts the unicorn one final time. But something has changed. Not the bull. The unicorn. Once she ran. Now she stands her ground. The symbolic force of this change is considerable. The bull's power was never based solely on physical strength. It depended upon his victims fleeing from him. When the unicorn refuses to surrender to that fear, he loses the advantage that had always made him so powerful. Through her courage, together with Schmendrick's magic and the events unfolding around them, the spell is finally broken. The unicorns surge out of the sea. They rise from the water like a luminous wave and return to freedom. It is one of the film's most memorable images, and yet it is both triumphant and strangely quiet. There is no great celebration, no victorious procession, only the sound of the sea and the light of countless unicorns returning to their world after so long in captivity. King Haggard watches in silence. He understands that everything around which he built his life is finally slipping beyond his reach. But he loses more than the unicorns. He loses the illusion that happiness can be held forever. The film portrays his downfall with remarkable restraint. Haggard appears less like a defeated tyrant than like a man whose entire life was built upon a misunderstanding. He believed that beauty could be preserved by locking it away. In the end, there is nothing left for him. And yet there is tragedy in that emptiness. Perhaps he was never truly searching for the unicorns themselves. Perhaps he was searching for the feeling they once awakened within him. And that feeling could never be captured. With this, the external conflict of the story comes to an end. The unicorns are free. The Red Bull has been overcome, but the true ending still lies ahead. Because now the characters must learn how to live with what they have become through the journey. After the unicorns have returned to freedom, the story could easily have ended like a traditional fairy tale. Evil would have been defeated, order restored, and the world returned to balance. But the last unicorn chooses another kind of ending. It does not end with perfection. It ends with memory. And that is where much of its lasting power can be found. Many fairy tales bring their characters back to where they began. After every trial, the world seems ready to become what it once was. Peter S. Beagle deliberately chooses something different. His characters may return to familiar places, but inwardly, they have been changed in ways that cannot be undone. This is especially true of the unicorn. At the beginning of the story, she exists beyond the ordinary human experience. She knows neither regret nor human love, neither grief nor the uncertainty that comes from knowing that life can be lost. Her existence is shaped by a kind of timeless harmony. By the end, she knows all of these things. She has found a companion. She has experienced love. She has known loss. And she carries memories that can never simply disappear. The unicorn has therefore become a creature standing between two worlds. She still belongs to the immortal beings of her own kind. But part of her has entered the human world and learned what it means to feel as humans do. This leads back to one of the quiet ideas running through the entire film. Experience cannot simply be undone. We can leave places. We can change our outward form. We can return home. But every encounter changes the way we see the world. The film does not present this as a tragedy. Instead, it treats change as an unavoidable part of existence. That is why the unicorn's final state carries such significance. She is no longer quite like the other unicorns. She knows something they do not. Not weakness, but compassion born from experience. This is often understood as one of the film's central ideas. The unicorn does not lose her essential nature through her experience of humanity. In a sense, she gains another dimension. She remains pure, but her purity is no longer simply the innocence of someone who has never known suffering. It has become something more conscious, a choice to remain kind after having learned what pain feels like. Schmendrick, too, has found his purpose. His transformation is quieter than those of many traditional heroes. He does not slay a dragon or claim a throne. Instead, he learns that true magic requires responsibility. At the beginning, he is trapped within his own uncertainty. By the end, he can act with clarity. And interestingly, his story does not conclude with the image of an all-powerful wizard. Instead, the film suggests that his real journey may only be beginning. He now possesses something more valuable than raw magical ability. He possesses understanding. His greatest victory is not a particular spell. It is that he has learned to look beyond himself. Molly Grue receives no spectacular conclusion. Perhaps that is precisely why her ending feels so true. She experienced the wonder she had spent so many years longing for. It came late, perhaps much later than she would once have wished. But it came. The film offers a quiet and almost comforting observation through her. Not every wonder arrives when we want it to. Some appear only after we have stopped expecting them. This does not mean that every wish will eventually come true. It simply means that hope does not always follow the path we imagine for it. Prince Lear leaves behind a very different kind of legacy. Different versions of the story place varying emphasis on certain details of his fate, but they share the essential idea that his selfless love makes him one of the story's most noble figures. He does not act for his own advantage. His courage does not grow from a desire for glory, but from his willingness to stand between danger and someone he loves. In doing so, he finally fulfills the ideal of knighthood that he once knew only from stories. He does not become a hero because he wants to be one. He becomes one because for once, he stops looking at himself. King Haggard leaves behind a very different memory. He is one of those rare fantasy antagonists who can inspire something closer to pity than hatred. His entire life begins to resemble a long search for a moment that has already passed. He wanted to possess beauty, and in doing so, he failed to understand that beauty remains alive only when it is allowed to remain free. There is something almost classical about the tragedy of his character. He does not merely lose to the heroes. He loses because he has misunderstood the nature of happiness itself. Another reason for the film's lasting significance lies in its openness. Many questions remain unanswered. What becomes of Schmendrick afterward? How does the experience change the other unicorns? Will Amalthea's memories of her human life ever fade? The film offers no definitive answers, and this absence is not a weakness. It is part of what the story is. Fairy tales often gain their power by refusing to explain everything. They leave space for reflection, imagination, and personal interpretation. Because of this, they can remain with us for many years, sometimes revealing something different each time we return to them. Alongside the more widely accepted interpretations, various fan theories have also developed over the years. Some suggest that the unicorn occupies a special place among her kind after returning, because she alone carries human experience within her. Others interpret Schmendrick's unusually long life as a test that finally ends with his selfless choice. Still others see the Red Bull as an embodiment of death itself. None of these interpretations is explicitly confirmed by the film. They remain speculation. Yet their existence demonstrates just how much space the story leaves for the imagination of those who encounter it. Perhaps this openness helps explain why the last unicorn continues to resonate decades after its release. A child may experience it as a fairy tale filled with mysterious creatures. A young person may discover a story about identity and first love. An adult may recognize questions about impermanence, memory, and the value of experiences that cannot be repeated. The film itself does not change with each stage of life. The person watching it does. And perhaps that is one of the most beautiful qualities a fairy tale can possess. It does not tell only one story. It accompanies us while we live our own. When the forest finally grows quiet again and the unicorn continues on her way, there is no sense of a final farewell. Instead, there is the feeling that some stories never truly end. They simply withdraw from sight, like stars fading from the morning sky. They have not disappeared. We simply cannot see them anymore. And perhaps this is the quietest truth at the heart of The Last Unicorn. Wonder does not necessarily leave the world. Sometimes it is simply waiting to be recognized again.